right, so hello again, everyone. I saw some of you guys last week. My name's Liz, and I'm the program manager with Carolina Navigators at UNC Chapel Hill. And I have two more of my students this week, Kierra and Gargi, that are going to talk to you about their experiences in Argentina and India. And they're going to talk a bit about protests and activism as well in those countries and give you some background information on those countries. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them.
Yeah, thank you all for coming today. It was very fascinating learning about your ice cream flavor preferences. But we are going to talk about protests in Argentina and India today because I think it's pretty relevant to all the things that we've seen, especially this year. But just a brief background about me. So I'm a senior now at UNC Chapel Hill, studying global studies and Spanish. But if I'd known earlier on that I enjoy environmental studies so much, I probably would have either done that as a major with Spanish. I still haven't decided, but it's too late now. I'm already almost done.
Nice. Well, it's nice to meet you all. I'm Gargi. I'm a freshman at UNC Chapel Hill, so I haven't really been on campus yet, but it's been great so far. And I'm majoring in computer science right now. So our objectives for today are to identify the types of protests that we see in India and Argentina. I'll be talking about India mostly, and Kira will talk about Argentina. And then we want to kind of help you guys compare the protests that we see in those countries to the protests we see in the US.
So we do have just a kind of point of reference. So the United States, you can see the yellow dot over to the left. And then I studied abroad in Argentina last summer for six weeks, I think. The time goes by so fast. But that, yeah, is down in South America. And you'll see the capital city later on. I'll tell you about it a little bit more later. And then to the right side of the map, we have India. So we just have a short game for y'all just to get you, I guess, accustomed to some of the brief facts about both countries. So, you can feel free to either say the answer out loud, what you think, or you can type it in the chat. But I'll just read the first question. So in what country are alfajores consumed?
Should I click the picture?
Oh yeah, you can click the picture.
Okay.
That's a hard one.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was either.
Argentina or India? Where do you think that one comes from?
Argentina.
Okay.
I won't say the answer yet. I'll wait for more people to respond. But it seems like everybody is saying Argentina. Yeah, okay, yeah. The answer is Argentina. They're pretty much like a kind of like a cookie. They're pretty sweet. They're pretty tasty, actually. I kind of really enjoyed mine with chocolate, and then they had this filling called dulce de leche, which is kind of like caramel, but honestly, I prefer it, and you usually would have it with churros or things like that. So the second question is, in what country is the national bird the peacock? Argentina or India?
Got one Argentina, one India.
Any more answers? Any more answers?
Guesses? Got a few more Indias.
Yeah, I got a couple more Indias. Yep, so the answer is India. The national bird is the peacock. I don't know if Gargi, you want to add anything to that or?
Yeah, just a fun fact.
Yeah. And then which country is the world's largest democracy? Argentina or India? Several Indias. Yeah, I think everybody has pretty much the same idea. India is the world's largest democracy.
Yeah, not much to add there, just a huge country, a lot of people. And then moving on to the second row, Sanskrit was the first language of this country. Which country is that, India or Argentina? Okay, I see a lot of Indias. That's true, it was. And I don't know if some of you do yoga or might have heard about it, then a lot of words that are used in yoga are in Sanskrit. The next one is, which country had 5 presidents in just 10 days? India or Argentina? Okay, I think we have 3 Argentinas, 4. Okay.
Yeah, the answer is Argentina. That was, I'm just going to speak about that a little bit more in 2000. It happened in 2001, but I'll speak about that period of time later.
And the last one is, mate is a popular tea in this country. Which country is that? Okay, I think we're split halfway right now. 2 Argentinas, 2 Indias.
We need people to break the tie. Russia, interesting. Okay, well, the answer is Argentina and also Uruguay. They drink it a lot there, and what you do is you pour water into this gourd type of cup. You can see it in the picture. Really, really hot water. And what kind of caught me off guard is usually you'll have, like, for example, a family, and they'll just kind of share the same one. And then, I don't know, being in the, I was just kind of used to having my own cup, but I decided to participate, and it was actually pretty good. I didn't mind. But I definitely can't do that now.
Yeah. And they do tea in India too, but just different types of tea, right, Gargi?
Yeah, tea is very popular in India. It's usually called chai. I think you get a version of that in Starbucks. It's not the same, but that's what it's called.
I was drinking some chai just yesterday. I like it a lot.
Nice.
So yeah, you can click it like 2 times and it should be that and then a map. So like I said earlier, I went to Argentina during the summer of 2019. I was there for 6 weeks, staying in the capital city of Buenos Aires. They speak Spanish there, by the way. It's one of the countries that speak a lot of, well, there are a lot of Spanish speakers there. But they do have a large population of Italians and Germans and Koreans and Chinese as well. They're the 2nd largest country in South America after Brazil. And then their Independence Day is actually July 9th, which is not too many days after, but several years after the United States got its independence. And then I'm sure you've all seen those jackets of like Patagonia. That's the region that it comes from, that was inspired by, as well as different other types of geography that kind of make up the country. And they're very fertile flatlands in the center. I know that it's one of the countries that produced a lot of soybeans. So if you like soy products, this is your go-to place.
All right, so okay. I'll just give a little bit of background about India. I actually lived in India for 7 years. I moved to India when I was 10, and then I moved back when I was 16. And some basic facts: the capital is Delhi. It's kind of in the north-ish of India. The languages spoken there are like numerous. There's 22 official languages of different states, but the main kind of national languages are Hindi and English, and all official communication happens in both those languages. And the prevalence of English just shows you how capitalism kind of left its mark on India. The population is huge, as I'm sure you're all aware, and Independence Day is August 15th, 1947. India is also very diverse in terms of geography. It's called a subcontinent because there's so many different types of like geographic conditions everywhere. There's the Himalayas, and then the plains, a desert, and several islands as well. India is located in Asia, and it has 9 neighbors. So I was wondering if you guys knew any neighbors that India has, neighboring countries. If you can think of any guesses, please drop them in the chat. The fact that it's in Asia should give you a hint. Yeah, Pakistan is one neighbor. That's great. China is a neighbor. That's true. 2 out of 9. Nepal, that's another one. Great. This one's a hard question. I didn't know most of these until this presentation. Myanmar, Afghanistan, perfect, yeah. Those are 5. And then other ones include Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Maldives. Bhutan, someone said Bhutan, and then Sri Lanka. So I think that's 9, yeah. It's the world's largest democracy and it's 7th largest by land area.
So we're going to transition over into discussing protests in both countries. We do have some preliminary questions to get you thinking about the subject of protest, what it looks like in the United States historically or modern day, as well as certain types of protests that you're familiar with. Yeah, if you, for the first question, for example, what are some popular forms of protest that you can think of? Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and say it, or you can put it in the chat as well. Or you can answer the second question too.
So yeah, the first one, the different ways that people might protest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sit-ins. Mm-hmm.
Yep, sit-ins.
And you can also type in if you can think of any movements in U.S. history that maybe you guys have learned about in school where protest was used. Rallies. Good.
Mm-hmm. Walking down the street.
Mm-hmm.
Other forms I can think of include like strikes, boycotts, yeah, demonstrations, and different movements such as that. And if you can think of any historical movements in the United States in which protest was used as well, feel free to say those. I know oftentimes protests have to deal with either social issues, economic issues, political issues, Boston Tea Party, women's rights,
civil rights.
Yeah. So I'm definitely thinking in the correct headspace. So yeah, I just wanted to familiarize ourselves with some of the examples in the United States, just so we can have a point of reference for when we go into discussing each country and what it has looked like historically up until today and the different types of protest movements that have occurred. Yeah. So just to start off, although there are many various moments in which protest has been used, one of the ones that have lasted for a very long time in Argentina is called Madres de la Plaza de Mayo. And so it happened, well, it began in 1977 and it still persists to today. So we'll watch a video very briefly, but just to give you a quick background. So women who had children and grandchildren that disappeared during Argentina's last military dictatorship, every Thursday they walk around the Plaza de Mayo, it's in their capital city of Buenos Aires, to demand answers for what happened to their children. And then this video, it'll play for just like a minute, but it'll give you a little bit more information about the reasons why and the history behind it. Yeah, you can find a lot more information and several documentaries about the military dictatorship that happened in Argentina. It was a very repressive period of time that kind of coincided as well with economic reforms that were happening. And so in order to implement these economic reforms, they relied on a lot of repression and control of the military. And I remember when I was down there, actually we went to, basically just call it a concentration camp, where people were sent and we learned a little bit more about the history of the disappeared. That's what they're often referred to. And yeah, it's pretty sad history, just knowing that people don't know where their family members went to. And then in the video itself, it's said that they found like 39 missing people, as opposed to, the thousands that are still have no names. So yeah, long history, but you can see the different ways that the Madres de la Plaza de Mayo have been using protests by walking around the Plaza de Mayo every Thursday, continuing to have that conversation and demanding to know what happened to their children. So that is definitely a pretty powerful form of protest.
Yeah, moving on to India and some of the historical protests that the country has seen. I'm sure everybody knows that India was colonized by the British, and the British rule was known as the British Raj. And it started in 1858 and continued all the way until 1947 when independence was won. So a big form of protests in India historically was peaceful protest, and this was kind of spearheaded by Mahatma Gandhi, and he called his movement Satyagraha. Satyagraha basically just stands for peaceful, nonviolent protest. But this does not mean that there wasn't violence during that time period of protest. One example of a protest that turned violent was the Jallianwala Bog Massacre in 1919. And the picture on the bottom right shows, depicts this massacre. Basically, a lot of peaceful protesters had gathered in a closed compound. So there was only one entrance and they were all inside and just demonstrating, holding up posters and just peacefully protesting. But the British commanders in that area brought in a lot of armed soldiers, and they blocked the only entrance and opened fire on all these unarmed protesters. So it was a very bloody massacre, and something that kind of was it was horrible because the protesters were unarmed and it was supposed to be peaceful, but it turned into something very violent and deadly. But yeah, some more examples of protests that were more peaceful and nonviolent and were spearheaded by Gandhi include the non-cooperation movement and the Quit India movement in 1920 and 1942. And both of these promoted protests in the form of boycott and rallies and marches. It was a way of showing the British rulers that Indian people were not willing to cooperate with this colonial rule, and they wanted their own kind of self-government.
So moving a little bit more forward into the present. So I mentioned earlier about how in Argentina in 2001, they had a period of 10 days in which they ran through 5 presidents in a matter of time. And this happened in 2001. It was a result of a severe economic depression that began in 1998. And if you learn a little bit more about Buenos Aires, you will be able to see the different ways, or I could say booms and busts of its economy. It started off being one of the most prosperous nations in the Western Hemisphere, but has since really struggled with problems of inflation and prices not being very stable at all. And so in Buenos Aires, the capital city experienced the most turmoil in December 2001, with protesters taking to the streets and with pots and pans to demonstrate. So if you look at videos of that time, you'll see massive amounts of people doing protesting and demonstrations and rallying. And you'll see them with their pots and pans and banging. And it started off that way, and it got more violent as the days continued. And I watched the video about how, for example, the Madres de la Plaza de Mayo, they did their circle around the plaza, but the police officers prevented them from continuing, which is when it got pretty violent. And riots began to happen because people didn't have access to food, and the government also had to freeze accounts, which brought a lot more people out to the streets, honestly in anger because of the economic issues that the country was facing. And yeah, they're really calling for changes to the different ways that the economy was being organized, which led to a lot of people having a lot to say with regards to how to handle bettering the different ways that the country could repair its economy. And so there's many videos you can find about this period of time, but usually you'll see a lot of people, with their pots and pans walking along the streets, calling for a change.
Moving to more recent protests again in India. India is a very heavily agricultural dependent economy. So there's a lot of farming that goes on and several issues that farmers face. All the pictures just show you different farmer strikes and protests regarding agriculture reforms. Farmers face issues like not having enough machines and having to do more menial labor. They face issues of going into debt and not being able to afford seed for producing crop, and also not getting the right kind of prices for the crops that they make or they grow. So recent protests over the past 2-3 years have looked like the pictures show. That they're mostly just a lot of people coming out and marching down the streets and holding up posters and demonstrating, just trying to make their voice heard to the government.
No, get down. Does someone have a question or? Okay. So more recently in Argentina, there have been strikes with regards to transportation protests. And so we'll watch a video really quickly, but to give you a little bit of background. So I remember the first day that I arrived there, the third day when we were supposed to have our orientation, they had to cancel it because the transportation workers, transportation workers, with regard like the taxi drivers and the subte, which is their subway stations, they were protesting. And so you have different reasons for why they brought up their grievances to the government. But on the left side, it talks about the taxi drivers in Argentina holding work stoppages, calling for Uber to not be offered in the country. And yeah, it definitely, according to the workers, it takes away some of their sources of income. It's because, yeah, most people tend to rely on taxi drivers, but as Uber comes into the country, that's, part of their market that they're not being able to have access to. And we'll just watch like 51 seconds of this video, and I'll give you a little bit more information of what the protest looked like, as well as the reasons for why they're angry about it.
And this has happened in quite a few countries with Uber and taxi drivers. I know in Spain there was issues with this. I think maybe also in the UK. And then currently in the US there's some controversy back and forth, I think in California, about how Uber drivers are treated as what type of employees they are. So they're, yeah.
Can someone working alone solve all the world's biggest challenges? As we overcome the pandemic, isn't collaboration...
Sorry, it won't let me skip the ad, so...
the way to bring clean water to the world's mega cities and produce enough food.
There we go.
Brought to a standstill. Around 24 key intersections in Buenos Aires blocked by the familiar black and yellow cabs of Argentina's capital city. The stickers say, "Get out Uber." These drivers convinced the online app is bad news.
A ellos no les importa.
They don't care about the law, said this driver. They just create all these problems which result in reducing our sources of employment. Uber is also accused of risking passenger safety by offering rides with drivers who aren't licensed or properly trained. The company disagrees, insisting it's permitted under Argentine law. Uber continues to operate normally, it said. It has not been prohibited, suspended, or shut down.
Is that how much you wanted to show?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, as you mentioned, Uber has definitely had some controversy in multiple countries. I've heard, like you said, in Spain and some other countries as well, where it's either banned or you have to be very discreet about how you're getting into the cars. I've heard of actually some violence happening because taxi drivers see that you're getting into an Uber. So one of the things that when I was there, they would tell us you would just sit in the front to make it seem like you were just getting a ride with your friend. I never really had any issues with regards to feeling in danger or anything like that. I felt pretty safe the whole time I was there. But it is something to keep in mind, just the fact that, yeah, they really viewed it as something that was taking away their income when it already is a very difficult situation with regards to the economy and inflation in Argentina. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the subte drivers holding strikes as well to protest for better working conditions. So there being asbestos on the B line a couple of years ago. B line is one of the routes that you can take on the subte, as well as more staff and more security. So they had boxes actually that you could pay to, well, you have a card pretty much that you would swipe to get into the trains. And so they would have boxes where you could pay money to reload your card to be able to ride. However, when they first opened 2 new lines, when I got down there, they were having issues because it was overrun, as well as the staff not being able to have opportunities to work and get a source of income as well. So they were calling for more staff and better working conditions. So you can kind of see how, yeah, protests can come in the form of work stoppages and strikes. And it has to deal with either social conditions, economic issues, or political issues, and many other issues you can see.
And a lot of countries or areas that have a lot of public transportation, the transportation strikes can happen quite often. I know in Europe too, the trains will be stopped or the buses will be stopped when the workers are trying to get better working conditions.
Yeah, Chile as well actually just experienced, especially last year, they were having a lot of protests. I'm pretty sure a couple of trains were actually set on fire. And then yesterday this weekend, they signed a referendum to change their constitution because it came from the military dictatorship era of Pinochet in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that, like what Liz and Kira were saying. Even in India, there have been protests against Uber, mostly by rickshaw drivers, which are the prevalent form of public transportation. Moving on to like my last bit about protests in India. A recent act that was signed in December 2019 was the Citizenship Amendment Act. And this Amendment Act was something that provided a path to Indian citizenship for illegal migrants. So refugees who were fleeing persecution from neighboring countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan, they were kind of given Indian citizenship if they were fleeing persecution. But the controversy about this act was because it was only offered to those who were either Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, or Christian. It was not offered to Muslim migrants from those countries. And so this was kind of the first time that Indian law had something that used religion as a criterion. So India is a secular country, so this act was seen as something that kind of brought religion and state together in not a very good way. So there have been a lot of protests recently in the news. You can see in the pictures just a lot of marches and demonstrations, a lot of people coming out to protest. And in the bottom right corner, the picture shows how protesters even march in front of places like the Delhi police headquarters and different government institutions to show their kind of grievances. And a lot of the protesters have been people of Muslim religion, which kind of goes to show the religious nature of this amendment. Okay, so time to do our final assessment. I think we have a Zoom poll, right?
Yeah, let me pull it up.
All right, so go ahead and choose which country you think is the answer to the first question.
We've got about 3/4 if everyone's responded. If other people want to take a guess. few more seconds. I think most people have taken a guess. So I'll go ahead and show the results.
Yeah, very good job. Honestly, it would have been correct to say India as well, just knowing that people have been protesting pretty much every country against Uber. And it's pretty fascinating to see how, yeah, something that is convenient for us in the United States and kind of a normal thing is, yeah, subject to a lot of controversy in other places. But yeah, you can see that in Argentina especially.
So yeah, the next question, where do you think this massacre took place, if you remember? I can tell you while we're paying attention. Oh, some people are saying they can't see the picture because the pole is popping up and covering it. So this one, just to remind you, was there was a peaceful protest. I don't know if you want to kind of give a background, Gargi, for the people that might not be able to see the picture.
Right, yeah, it was a peaceful protest in a closed area, and then soldiers came in and started shooting on the unarmed protesters. And I think there were like 300 plus deaths.
So a few more seconds if you want to guess. Yep, most of you guys remembered that one was in India.
Yeah, we have a couple more open-ended questions to wrap up, and you can use the chat to answer, or you can answer out loud. So what are some common types of protests shared between the United States and India?
Sorry. Oh,
there. Rallies. And you can see that in Argentina with the Madres de la Plaza de Mayo, as well as in the United States with rallies during the Civil Rights Movement, for example. Strikes. Yeah, rally strikes. People mentioned sit-ins, boycotts, demonstrations. I remember watching a show in which a person in protest out of something they decided not to eat for an extended period of time. And that was one of the ways that they, wanted to call attention to the injustice that we're seeing. But yeah, different types of protests, we already mentioned them, and they can be, actually I'm not gonna answer the second question yet. So why is the ability to protest important?
So you can unmute yourself, or you can put your answers in the chat of why you think it might be important in general or important to you. So to show people how you feel and to make a change. So you can show the government what you want. Sometimes the government makes decisions that not all the people agree with.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah, exactly. Very good answers. Thank y'all for responding. So yeah, showing people that you want to make a change and you're seeing an issue that you want to see amended. And this can be with regards to the government. It can be in response to economic issues, environmental issues. You'll see a lot more frequently as well. I mean, the importance of protest is kind of you're exercising that right to say, hey, I have an issue with this, and I feel that it should be amended. Exactly. If you have rights are being taken away or exploitation as well, you'll see protests happening. And then the last question, under what circumstances does protest seem likely?
So someone said when something has happened that makes the citizens of that country upset, when some injustice is happening, when the government fails to protect the people.
Yeah, that theme of injustice is pretty common. When you see protests beginning to happen, inequity, injustice, exploitation, these are all different reasons for why people start to protest. And actually, today I was reading for my environment class, and we talked about the protests that began in the 60s and 70s in response to water pollution and just pollution in general. And so people in the United States started to hold rallies and do different types of demonstrations to tell the government that they really wanted better circumstances and conditions of their water and air quality and things like that. And that's when the EPA was created. So random fun fact for you.
All right, so I think we kind of covered this in the last few questions, but just to wrap up our discussion, how do protests in both of these countries relate to what protests in the US look like? I think we talked about how rallies and strikes and sit-ins are kind of common across both countries.
And if you want, you can make connections between some of the protests you saw in Argentina and India and ones that you think were maybe similar in the United States, either history or currently. If you saw any similarities or differences, feel free to point those out or mention those. So yeah, someone said Black Lives Matter is kind of like some of them.
Yeah, I remember as I was looking into information for the presentation, especially during the 2001 protests in Argentina, you'll see lots of similarities between the issues that people are facing then and now and how they go about responding to those issues, as well as actually in the 1930s during the Depression in the United States. Pretty similar responses to people, with regard to the situation economically with protests and writing and things like that.
Around the world, there's quite a few different movements right now against police brutality. I know in Nigeria, there's one called SARS, and there's a few that are very similar to what's happening in the United States. Yeah, someone said they were going to say Nigeria.
Yeah, it's pretty sad.
Yeah, even thinking historically, like just how the US and India both have a shared kind of colonial history. So protest against colonialism was similar in both countries and even in other countries around the world. So that's kind of something that a lot of countries share in their history of protest.